This is the February 15th, 1925 Watchtower. Right at the year everything's going to end and this kingdom on earth is going to start. This is the year Rutherford predicted.
Millions now living will never die.
Right. So he starts it out by telling this story about an abandoned gold mine, which was sold to new owners who later found lots of gold because they kept mining for it. And the original owners were upset, right? So this story is used to justify his reasoning about the Jubilee prophecy ending in 1925 and how he was the one to mine out these deeper truths when all other denominational companies, as he describes it, gave up on the mine. Except this never really happened. Nobody really, the splinter groups didn't give up on that idea, at least not pointing to 1925. They didn't accept the 1925 idea. Rutherford was the only one who had that idea. All of this was just quickly forgotten. And Rutherford here tries to narrow his prediction down. He starts pointing at October 1st to 10th of 1924. This is where some of his rejection of the Jews starts to begin. He says, but the Jews as a nation are not in the land in 1925. And they cannot keep 1925 as a Jubilee, his prediction. If you remember Rutherford's Comfort for the Jews book, he touted the liberation of Jerusalem in 1917 by General Allenby of England.
With the Balfour Declaration.
Of 1918.
Declaring it is
yeah. And Jews were moving back to the land. So here he rejects the Jews based on his false prediction. Because this Jubilee, as he was predicting it in 1925, didn't happen. So he claims a fulfillment then has to be amongst spiritual Israel, not amongst literal Israel. He tries to make his fulfillment fit a spiritual fulfillment, applying to themselves as the ones who would do the Jubilee. So his prediction happened.
Which would ultimately be a double spiritual Israel. Because spiritual Israel is in heaven. Now we have another spiritual Israel on earth. So on a technicality, it's really a double spiritual Israel. Not even on a technicality, on a just declaration or indictment. It's a double claim.
It's just bizarre to me that his whole rejection of the Jews is that they couldn't celebrate the Jubilee in the year he predicted. So instead of admitting he made a mistake, he just has to get rid of the Jews and say, we're the Jews and it happened.
That's it. That's what he did. That's really what he did. And it's in writing. I mean, we're not making this up. It's in writing.
So it reminds me of those scriptures we've quoted many times on our channel before. Revelation 2:9 and Revelation 3:9. Those who claim they are Jews and are not, they're a synagogue of Satan. So notice that Rutherford isn't using Daniel 4 for the 7 times prophecy to prove his point. He's pointing to the 7 times of Leviticus 25 and 26, which the JWs no longer point to. They appoint that, yeah. So this is probably one of the reasons they stopped using the passage, because it's pointing to those who are in law covenant relationship with God. The JWs were never in a law covenant arrangement with Jehovah. That can only apply to the Jews who are under the law. So the JWs just quietly forgot about this. They don't mention it anymore.
And is spiritual Israel under the law? So if spiritual Israel is not under the law, then how are they even in existence for that role?
Yeah.
If they're spiritual Israel, if you understand where I'm going.
Yeah. It reminds me of Romans 9, 10, and 11, which I discussed with my Jehovah's Witness friend here in the area that I live. And they claim that they're spiritual Israel. But if you, in Romans 11, but hop back to Romans 10 and Romans 9, it's all about those who are in law covenant arrangements. So they had the law, they had the prophets, they had all these things from God, and then it proceeds to go through all of Israel's history. That could not apply to Jehovah's Witnesses because they weren't under the law.
Mm-hmm.
And that's Paul's whole point in Romans, that, you Gentiles, you're guilty because you had the law in your conscience, in your heart, and you didn't do it. And you Jews are guilty because you had the law written out and you didn't do it. All y'all are guilty, basically, is where he's headed with that. And the only way out of that condition is to have a Savior, a Christ. So that's Paul's whole point. So how the Jehovah's Witnesses just discard Romans 9 and 10 before they get to chapter 11 just takes and rips that whole chapter right out of context.
So then let's not use it.
Just like these evidences that they don't use for the 1924 convention anymore. Here, Rutherford talks about the history, but it's really showing that he didn't know the history that well at all. He makes claims, but he didn't know what was really going on. So he's claiming that the 1914 date was proclaimed as early as 1876 and 1877. That's true for Charles Taze Russell because he wrote about it in an October 1876 Bible Examiner of George Storrs. But if you look at where that 1914 date came from, it's much earlier than that. And that, as we say, is another story for another time. So we'll get to that in a future discussion. But what Rutherford's trying to do is he's attempting to reason out why July and August of 1924 would be the start of his prophecy of Jubilee, rather than the October dates that Watchtower was always pointing
even
at.
The Jewish calendar followed.
Yeah. So his reasoning's a bit stretched, but here it is. We're going to go there. So he starts out by talking about the number 10 in Scripture. The number 10 has a thought of entirety or completeness or to an end. It was 10 years from 1914 to 1924. So that proves 1924 is a very important date.
Sounds logical to me.
And then he disses the Jews, as we said, by saying, if the Jews were in their homeland, we would have expected the blowing of the Jubilee trumpets to begin on October 1st, announcing 1925 as the Jubilee. And it didn't happen, as Rutherford expected. So instead of admitting his mistake, he blames the Jews, entirely rejects them, because the Jews didn't fulfill Rutherford's false prophecy, which he discarded anyway in the future.
Who else blamed the Jews for all their problems?
He took the number 10, tried to apply it that way. He did the same thing with the number 7. So he states that the number 7 is used in Revelation, and that is also in connection with the Jubilee. So what does Rutherford do? He links this number to his illegal takeover of the Watchtower. And remember, we had this discussion with Rood already. And he blames those he ousted. And he adds 7 years to this purge that he did in Bethel. And he says, it will be remembered by all associated with the work in 1916 that the trouble began almost immediately after Brother Russell's death. However, it was not until the 7th volume came out that the trouble culminated. Now listen to our interview with Rood, and we're going to be doing a deep dive into this subject as well, but what Rutherford's claiming here didn't happen the way he's suggesting. We'll get into that in a future discussion. So it was on the 17th day of July. 17, you got a 10 and a 7. That makes 17. 17th of July. There's your evidence, right? So that's probably why Rutherford's picking that particular date. And he's claiming that's when the finished mystery was distributed to the Bethel family. And it was on that day that trouble at Bethel came to a head and continued until many who had been very active in the service for years withdrew from further activities and connections with the society. They didn't withdraw, they were kicked out. If you look at the documentation for it, it's quite clear. And we will see, you see a little bit of that if you listen to the interview we had with Rude. They were expelled. So Rutherford's claiming that July 17th, 1917 was a marked date. So now we get to the entire reason for why he's going through this and adding this idea to the article. It's the Columbus Convention in 1924. So here's Rutherford's reasoning on that. Early in the year, the Society entered into communication with the management of the grounds in Columbus, Ohio, with the end in view that they'd have a convention there. Both of the previous conventions they had for Trumpet Blast 1 and Trumpet Blast 2 were in September, the week following Labor Day, basically. So the thought was to secure that same period of time, namely September 2nd to 9th. And then he says, we were surprised that although we had applied in February, they waited too long, basically. Another association already held an option on that week, and management was unable to give us a date earlier than the week after. And that was too late, and it would be inconvenient to many. So the chairman of the Columbus Convention site in Columbus chose July 20th to 27th. Rutherford's claiming, I didn't choose that date. Nothing further than that noted above was thought about the date at that time. But on Friday morning, July 26th, at the close of the stirring address that the president of our society presented a resolution which he headed an indictment, a copy of which appeared in the Watchtower and in the public press. Well, did it really occur in the public press? We'll see about that. It was an arraignment against the old world, stating in legal, scriptural form that the rule of the Gentiles had failed, that they had therefore been cast off forever from divine favor. So he says that about the Gentiles, and he says that about the Jews here at that convention. Rutherford continues, as noted above, the Committee on Arrangements for the convention did not choose the date finally decided upon. It was sent by the Columbus Chamber of Commerce. Not until close to the convention time was it noticed that the date for the public witness, July 27th, 1924, completed just 10 years to a day from July 28th, 1914, when the Great War started. The message of the public meeting to the stadium was civilization doomed. The end of the old is at hand and the news coming in. What a more fitting subject could have been chosen? That same Sunday morning, the 27th, a brother gave a discourse before the convention in the Coliseum on the subject, The Year of Jubilee Has Come. So because they picked a date that was somewhat close to the other one 10 years previous was in evidence, it's a stretch. He's trying to find things to prove they're the chosen ones. I'm not sure what it proves. Doesn't prove anything other than you're trying to prove something. So the talk was broadcast on the radio, and a lot of that time Watchtower purchased, but they did have a couple of their own radio stations, one in Staten Island, one in Batavia, Illinois. And Rutherford asked the question, shall we say all this was merely coincidental? Yeah, it didn't happen. There's 9 points he's raised so far that was evidence for this convention being divinely appointed, and why it's one of the trumpet blasts.